in that regard, especially in its immediate vicinity. Whether it is finance, food, fertilizer, or fuel, we have responded to the urgent requirements of our neighbors. Madam President, climate events and conflicts have created a demand for HADR assistance. Reflecting our growing capabilities, Bharat has endeavored to be a first responder. Be it essential medicines or relief supplies, the operations of a field hospital or limb fitment camps, these efforts covered 19 nations last year. The people of Afghanistan and those of Myanmar saw India extend its hand during recent earthquakes. Our efforts at ensuring safe commerce, combating piracy, and preventing attacks on shipping in the Northern Arabian Sea also bear mention. And the Indian tradition of UN peacekeeping operations continues in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Western Sahara, Central African Republic, Golan Heights, Cyprus, Lebanon, Abyei, South Sudan, and Somalia. To put it clearly, our soldiers ensure peacekeeping, our sailors protect maritime shipping, our security counters terrorism, our doctors and teachers facilitate human development the world over, our industry produces affordable products, our techies promote digitization, and our training facilities are open to the world. These remain the core of our foreign policy. Madam President, each one of us has the opportunity of contributing to peace and prosperity. In the case of conflicts, especially Ukraine and Gaza, even those not directly involved have felt its impact. Nations who can engage all sides must step up in the search for solutions. India calls for an end to hostilities and will support any initiative that will help restore peace. The last decade in Bharat has also seen transformative changes due to the vision of Prime Minister Modi. Our digital public infrastructure has redefined governance and enabled delivery of public services on an unprecedented scale. Our startup ecosystem, innovation culture, and microfinance are changing the face of society. Our rapidly growing infrastructure facilitates both ease of doing business and ease of living for citizens. India remains committed to sharing its experiences and tools with others on their journey of development. Artificial intelligence as a horizontal and cross-cutting technology has a particular promise for development. India's approach is to harness it responsibly for human welfare. Inclusion and impact will be the watchwords for the summit that India will host in 2026. Madam President, Bharat approaches the contemporary world guided by three key concepts. One, Atmanirbharta, or self-reliance. That means developing our own capabilities, building our own strengths, and nurturing our own talent. We see its results already, be it in manufacturing, in space programs, in pharma production, or in digital applications. Make, innovate, and design in India also benefit the world. Two, Atma Raksha, or securing oneself. We remain determined to protect our people and secure their interests at home and abroad. That means zero tolerance for terrorism, robust defense of our borders, forging partnerships beyond, and assisting our community abroad. And three, Atma Vishwas, or self-confidence. As the most populous nation, as a civilizational state, as a rapidly growing major economy, we are confident about who we are and what we will be. Bharat will always maintain its freedom of choice and will always be a voice of the Global South. Madam President, these are certainly challenging times for the international community. Many of our assumptions and expectations no longer hold. In such circumstances, it is imperative to stay strong, to hold firm, and to deepen friendships. International cooperation must prevail because islands of prosperity cannot flourish in an ocean of turbulence. A world order requires common purpose, as it does empathy for others. That is where we look to the United Nations. Madam President, every member who can make this world a better place must have the opportunity to do their utmost. And for that to happen, reformed multilateralism is the obvious way. The 9th decade of the UN must be one of leadership and hope. Bharat will do its fair share and more. I thank you.
I thank the Minister for External Affairs of India. والآن أعطي الكلمة.
And I give the floor to His Excellency Badr Ahmed Mohammed Abdel Ati, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Immigration and Egyptian Expatriates of Egypt. In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Your Excellency Annalena Baerbock, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, our celebration today of the 80th anniversary of the United Nations was supposed to be an occasion, an opportunity to reflect on the journey of this organization, an opportunity to think of the achievements of the organization in maintaining international peace and security and ensuring prosperity and development for all, and establishing an international order based on international law that are applied by all, that apply to all, to preserve the dignity and rights of all. However, the reality of these international organizations today, 80 years after its establishment, has nothing to do with these noble goals. The multilateral international system is facing challenges. Its pillars are being eroded. It's fluid as a result of crimes being committed in full view of the international community. The international community is standing idly by, is a spectator before the systemic violations of international law that undermined the international system. We're seeing double standards across the board, but especially in the Middle East. The Middle East is at a point of implosion. The bases of stability, peace, and security are absent. There is no noteworthy respect of international legitimacy. Our Palestinian brethren is falling victim to the most heinous Israeli actions. It's a war, a wanton, unjust war waged against defenseless civilians for a sin they did not commit, driven by an extremist ideology that only sees destruction, killing, and systematic starvation, a toxic narrative, an incitement to hatred and violence. The aggression is transpiring without accountability, and it has affected one country of the region after the other. The most latest, what we've seen, is the wanton aggression against brotherly Qatar. Egypt is one of the first to anchor the pillar of peace in the region when President Sadat visited Jerusalem in a historic visit in 1979. Egypt feels concerned and feels responsible at the same time. 2 years following this wanton aggression against Gaza, following the daily violations in the West Bank, the foundations of peace that we have been laying for 75 years are now being threatened. In light of these difficult circumstances, Egypt presents its vision to deal with the situation in the Middle East and the international system as follows. First, we express our appreciation and gratitude to President Donald Trump, which announced his full commitment and his willingness to work with the leaders of the region to end this unjust war against Gaza, according to an integrated, comprehensive vision that stops the bloodshed, that ensures security for all, that restores the foundation to bring back lost trust. Egypt is fully willing, and is fully committed to building on the vision by President Trump to restore stability, to end the war, to open a political horizon that paves the way towards the establishment of the Palestinian state, to also release hostages and detainees, and to heal all wounds, the wounds of the orphans, the wounds of the injured, the wounds of the hungry in the Gaza Strip, and put an end to the arrogance of might, and to put it aside, and to restore hope for tomorrow. Egypt, since the outbreak of this crisis, have done its utmost to reach a ceasefire that is sustainable in Gaza, in partnership with brotherly Qatar and the United States of America. We worked on resuming the entry of humanitarian aid without obstacles to address the starvation that is made by Israel, created by Israel. We must restore the basic necessities of life. The entry of humanitarian aid must be a priority for the international community. Together, we all must ensure the provision of humanitarian aid as soon as possible and at scale. And we also must work together to protect civilians. We reiterate that we categorically reject any scenarios to forcibly displace the Palestinian people. This would be a crime of ethnic cleansing. We say this very clearly. Egypt is not and will not be a gate to liquidate the Palestinian cause. We will continue to support the resilience of the defined Palestinian people that is holding on to its national territories. We will never be a partner in a new Nakba, bringing humanitarian tragedies, even more humanitarian tragedies. Egypt also presented a plan for reconstruction and recovery that was accepted at the Arab, Islamic, and international level. We commend the invaluable role of UNRWA, the indispensable role of UNRWA. It is providing valuable support to millions of Palestinian refugees. We also commend the role of the United Nations and its specialized agency. We call upon the countries of the world to provide the necessary and sustainable support to UNRWA. The continued of Israeli occupation, the genocide transpiring today in the Gaza Strip, depriving the Palestinian people of their legitimate rights, most notably the right to establish its independent state along the lines of the 4th of June 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. This hollows out any narrative of peace and security in the region. In this regard, we express our full support to the conference on the two-state solution led by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France. We commend the courageous decisions by states that have recently announced that they do recognize the independent Free State of Palestine. Israel cannot be secure when others are not secure. The region cannot see stability without an independent state of Palestine. International resolutions contain the parameters necessary to settle the conflicts of the region. What we need is insight, wisdom, political will, and understanding the lessons of the past. We need foresight. In this context, we warn of the continuation of oppressive policies and irresponsible Israeli practices to close the door on peaceful coexistence and regional cooperation. In light of these challenges, Egypt and Saudi Arabia presented a joint vision for security and cooperation in the region, adopted by the League of Arab States. This would be the foundation for a new vision of a region where all countries enjoy balanced security, comprehensive security. We extend the hand of peace. Don't fail children that look to a bright future, young people that wish to build and restore. Don't fail the elderly that want to live in dignity and peace. I quote President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi: "Peace is Egypt's strategic choice to ensure a secure and stable future for the peoples of the region." End of quote. Second, Egypt looks at the conflicts in the region from a perspective of international law, from a perspective that gives precedence to the sovereignty of states and settling disputes by peaceful means and maintaining national states and national institutions. Also, counter-terrorism. These are all bases for stability. In this context, Egypt stresses the importance of supporting brotherly Sudan that is going through a delicate juncture in its history. All efforts must be made. We strongly support maintaining and preserving the institutions of the Sudanese state, including the Sudanese National Army. We're working in cooperation with the Sovereignty Council and international partners as part of the International Quartet to restore stability, peace, and security in the Sudan, based on national Sudanese ownership to fulfill the aspirations of the brotherly Sudanese people. We also firmly support brotherly Libya and its national institutions. Presidential elections, parliamentary elections must be held simultaneously as soon as possible. It is important for all foreign forces and mercenaries and foreign fighters to leave Libya. If we are serious about peace and security in Libya, this would consolidate stability and security and would unite Libyan institutions and allow it to extend its authority over all Libyan territory. The Yemeni crisis must be settled based on international parameters. We must maintain the security of navigation routes along the Red Sea. It is the lifeline of international trade. Egypt is one of the most affected parties from this escalation. We lost more than $9 billion revenues of the Suez Canal as a result of disruptions in international trade going through the Red Sea. The stability, security, and territorial integrity of Somalia is part and parcel of the security of the region. We call for making concerted efforts and mobilizing the necessary funding in order to activate the AU mission in Somalia. Egypt intends to contribute to this force with a military and police component. I also must strongly condemn repeated Israeli violations of the sovereignty of Lebanon and Syria. We condemn continued violations of Lebanese and Syrian territories. It is of utmost importance to respect the territorial integrity of Syria and Lebanon. Against this background, in light of these complex regional challenges, Egypt is playing a prominent humanitarian role. We are hosting more than 10 million refugees and displaced persons on our territory. We are providing an environment that respects their dignity, that respects their rights, and that ensures that they receive basic services without discrimination. Despite increasing burdens that go beyond our capacity, and I don't think that there is any other country in the world that is hosting such number of refugees, providing this kind of services and treating them as Egyptians. As I said, these burdens go beyond our capacity, especially in light of regional international economic crises. Nevertheless, Egypt continues to fulfill its moral and humanitarian responsibility. We believe it is important to share responsibility. The principle of shared responsibilities is contained in the International Convention on Refugees. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is leading the way to settle disputes. Our region has seen targeting nuclear facilities that are subject to the AIEA Safeguard Agreement, which is inconsistent with international law. Fourth, we believe that cooperation according to international law is the pillar of mutual respect and the only way to ensure joint benefits. Experience has shown that unilateral measures deepen crises and increase gaps. Ethiopia saw that imposing a fait accompli and violating international law as part of its destabilizing policy in the Horn of Africa and the Eastern Nile Basin declared that the dam has been completed and what's happened just has happened. It is delusional, as it believes that Egypt will forget its rights when it comes to the Nile. There's those who pay lip service to international law, but we are ready to resort to justice, to resort to international arbitration. If intentions to actually abide by these mechanisms turn out to be true, if they turn to stalling, if they turn to threatening the fate of people in downstream countries, we will get back our rights and we will not be lax in that journey. International law allows us to protect our existential interests in the Nile Basin. Fifth, we believe that restoring the United Nations and international financial institution is no longer a matter of choice. It's a necessity to ensure a balanced representation in the decision-making bodies at international level. Egypt is committed to the Zelwini Consensus and the CERT Declaration to lift the historic injustice that has inflicted the African continent. We also believe it's important to provide concessional financing and address the debt crisis. In conclusion, once again, I stress that we look forward to building upon the outcomes of the 4 Financing for Development conference hosted by Spain in July to take effective steps to finance development. We also look forward to enhancing efforts for developing countries to have access to AI and digital technologies. At COP20, at the COP conference hosted by Egypt, we made efforts to ensure we have a loss and damage fund, especially in light of crisis in climate financing. It's important to provide financing to developing countries without increasing the debt burdens on these countries. Ladies and gentlemen, the international landscape is critical and precarious at the moment. In light of our role, regionally, internationally, and in light of our historic role, we had to warn of the upcoming danger and present a roadmap to address this critical phase. We are at a critical juncture. Either the Middle East would go back to reason, to go back to international law, or we rush towards a state of chaos that some might think would be able to control by force, by the arrogance of force. However, experience and history has shown that using force would inevitably lead to a disaster, and the first to be affected by that are those who have used force. I stress that Egypt, as a founding member of the United Nations, remains, after 80 years of the existence of this United Nations, we remain committed to international law. We remain committed to enhancing multilateral action, as we recognize that absence of international governance will affect us all. We have a negative impact on us all. There is no alternative to committing to international law and to enhance the implementation of international law. There is no alternative to holding violators of international law accountable. There is no country above the law. There is no country, whatever it is, that cannot be held to account. All this to maintain international peace and security, to achieve sustainable development, and to promote human rights. In conclusion, I quote President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi: "Peace is not born out of force and bombardment. It's not born out of normalization that peoples reject. Peace is only built on understanding, equity, and justice." I thank you very much. I thank His Excellency, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Immigration, and Egyptian Expatriates of Egypt.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Maxim Bezhenkov, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belarus.
Distinguished Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this year's general debate is Better Together, 80 Years and More for Peace, Development and Human Rights. An excellent theme. The key word here is together. So together, let's remember everything and reflect. And I'm confident that we will find the true root causes of the challenges and threats facing the planet today. First, the 80th anniversary of the great victory in the Second World War. 8 decades ago, a bloody and merciless war ended, which was a great tragedy for all of humanity. And only at the cost of millions of lost and broken lives did we overcome this challenge. The contribution of the United States and Great Britain to great victory is obvious, as is that of the Chinese people who threw off the yoke of Japanese militarism. However, the decisive factor was the defeat of the Soviet people, a multinational people who fought down to the last drop of blood for their freedom and the freedom of oppressed peoples. Note that they did not hand over the keys to their cities to the conquerors. They did not hide behind pro-Nazi collaborationist regimes. They did not supply the Nazi regime with equipment and soldiers. Back then, 80 years ago, this was obvious. The liberators were greeted with flowers and rejoicing in the capitals of Europe. Monuments and memorials were erected in their honor, and streets and cities were named after them. Only 80 years of life have gone by since then, a life of prosperity and peace in Europe, and how everything has changed. The West has developed its own version of the truth about the events of those years. Memories are being erased, monuments demolished, history textbooks rewritten. Once again, we hear Nazi slogans and chants in city streets. This is how the 21st century generation is being raised, a generation that did not see the horrors of that war. They did not even hear about it from their parents. And so they are fueled by the false heroism of their ancestors who in the past had joined Hitler's coalition of nations, dreaming of world domination. If history is being rewritten, then its conclusions are also being rewritten. This calls into question the legitimacy of the post-war world order based on the universal principles of the United Nations. That seems clear. And it seems that they were forced into doing so. The West was forced into doing so for a certain period of time. The collective West was at that time forced to share the burden of responsibility for the fate of the planet with the so-called Soviet bloc, to set aside their thoughts of world domination for a while and to wait, of course, to wait for events to come to pass that would allow everything to be turned on its head. From this rostrum, in the past few days, we have already heard people say that the Holocaust is our shared shame. Why is it our shared shame? Everyone is answerable themselves before history. We, Belarusians, for example, fought Nazism down to the last drop of blood and laid down our lives to do so. We saved Jews at the cost of our own lives. We cannot remain silent about this today. We remember the hundreds of villages burned by the Nazis together with their inhabitants, the millions of Belarusians torn apart and mutilated, and the hundreds of thousands of children and women taken into European slavery. And therefore, we understand that preserving memory is important so that history does not repeat itself, so that there are no more national ideologies of racial superiority, where there is no place for entire peoples, so that there are no concentration camps, that terrible invention of the West, and also to make sure that there is no genocide against any people. The Belarusian people have been living in peace now for 80 years, and if you look at our history, that is an incredibly long time to live in peace. Never have Belarusians lived so well, with such dignity and under such peaceful skies as in the last 30 years, when, under the leadership of our president, we have been successfully building a socially oriented state in the interests of ordinary people. At the same time, we sacredly preserve the memory of the terrible tragedy of the Second World War, and we pass this memory on to younger generations. Why don't many others around us, especially to the west of our border, want to live like this? Well, the answer is simple. The politicians there are blinded by their personal ambitions. They cannot see ordinary people behind those ambitions, even in their own countries. And so it is no surprise that they treat human life with such contempt, as well as that of other peoples, for example, calling on Ukraine to fight down to the last Ukrainian. This year is also significant for the UN, which is celebrating its 80th anniversary. The organization was created by the victors of that bloody war. We remember that Belarus was among the first founders as well. Belarus, a country where 1 in 3 people were killed, tortured, or burned. And throughout all these years, the Belarusian delegation has been one of the most reliable supporters of strengthening the foundations of the UN, initiating the most bold, peace-loving, and historically hard-won initiatives. Therefore, we have the right to speak directly today about what our organization has achieved by the time of its anniversary. And I would like to talk about 3 key elements. First, it is indisputable that the UN remains a central element of international life. This has been made possible by its undisputable legitimacy, its universal membership, and its comprehensive agenda. However, we can see that the principle of universality has been seriously undermined, especially in the last decade. And that has been done by those that are constantly trying to turn the UN into a tool for advancing their own interests, in addition to doing so contrary to the aspirations of humanity. Secondly, the UN is indeed preserving the planet from another world war. Its key mechanism, the Security Council, allows the great powers to discuss matters of war and peace at the table rather than on the battlefield. However, unfortunately, this body is being used less and less. Its influence on world affairs is no longer what it used to be, and let's be honest, the UN has proved incapable of preventing many of the bloody regional conflicts of our time, and the further thing goes on, the more this is true. Thirdly, A huge network of international structures has been created under the UN, and a multitude of legal documents have been developed. This infrastructure provides an opportunity for effective interaction across the entire spectrum of human activity. But if you look closely, only some of the UN structures remain truly effective and are actually fulfilling their functions. Why is this happening? Well, it's obvious. The organization has to keep up with the times. That requires reform, which our Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been talking about, and first and foremost, that of the UN Security Council. And here I'm talking inter alia about expanding the category of permanent members to include developing countries from Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Over the past 8 decades, the membership of the organization has grown exponentially, and many states that were not even on the world map when the UN was founded want their opinions and voices to be heard, and they have a right to do so, as now they are important political and economic actors. They rightly expect the UN will work in the interests of all of its members and to strengthen cooperation between them, rather than being a tool for manipulation by individual countries. And this includes settling scores with other states. Fourth, we also see a problem in the fact that the UN is being used for certain purposes. The actions of the United States of America to reduce its support to the UN, which has already caused plans to cut staff in our organization, are a very unpleasant wake-up call. But you'll have to agree that if the UN is able to be an impartial forum and move with the times, it will be in demand by everyone, the weak and the strong, the developed and the developing. Otherwise, it will suffer the same fate as the League of Nations. And Belarus does not want that to happen because, for the time being, we do not see any alternative to the UN. And that is why talking about these institutional problems sincerely today is important to understand their nature and to correct them. The 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act is being marked this year as well. This document, initiated incidentally by the leadership of the Soviet Union, consolidated the realities that had developed in Europe after the Second World War. The act also predetermined the stable nature of relations between the Soviet Union and the United States, which was reflected in all regions of the world and helped to make the Cold War slightly more manageable. It also introduced the principle of indivisible security, adherence to which prevented the Cold War from escalating into a hot one. The Helsinki Agreements provided an opportunity to build a united, indivisible and prosperous Europe during and after the Cold War. However, history took a different path. Today, the so-called victors of the Cold War have completely forgotten this principle and adopted a logic of superiority and confrontation. Incidentally, it was precisely this logic that was behind NATO's eastward expansion. As a result, the balance of power in Europe was undermined, and security threats arose for many states. The Yugoslav crisis, the bloodshed in a number of post-Soviet republics, and the conflict in Ukraine are the most striking examples of such consequences. Today, it is clear that the way to end the bloodshed in Ukraine lies in all parties in Europe returning to an understanding of the importance of respecting the principle of indivisible security. And it's important that one of the main global centers of power, the United States, has finally started to understand the importance of this. Unfortunately, the EU countries aren't doing the same thing. They continue to stoke regional conflict with the firewood of Ukraine. Joint efforts are particularly needed to increase the level of trust between countries, although there are no ready-made solutions at present. But action must be taken, and we, in Belarus, which is at the heart of Europe, understand this perhaps better than anyone else. After all, it was through us that the most tragic wars of modern times have swept through our country every 50 years or so, leaving nothing but memories in their wake, and that is why we cannot delay. Just look at what our European neighbours are doing on the EU's border with Belarus and Russia. They are laying mines, building walls, moats and trenches, defensive lines and barbed wire. They are trying to create a sense among their population of an impending threat from the barbarians to the east, and there have actually already been victims, albeit among NATO countries who are either drowning in bogs or being blown up by their own mines. Incidentally, I saw here on the North Lawn near the UN building a piece of the Berlin Wall has been set up as a monument to human rights, and the inscription says 155 kilometers and 200 victims during its existence, or something to that effect. Today, a much larger wall, thousands of kilometers long, is being erected on the border between the EU and Russia and Belarus, from Finland down to Poland. And there have already been hundreds of victims along this wall since its construction began. Today, hundreds of innocent migrants from countries of the south who, in search of a better life, are striving to reach the EU, which has destroyed the normal way of life in their countries, are dying. So if we are not able to prevent the construction of this wall together, then let us at least reserve a place on the North Lawn where we can put up a piece of that wall when the countries in question come to their senses and decide that such a wall is no longer necessary. We could say how long it was and how many people died as a result. And we can say that this is a monument to the right of freedom of movement. Belarus is speaking out and proposing concrete solutions. In particular, the President of the Republic of Belarus has put forward an initiative to develop a Eurasian Charter of Multipolarity and Diversity in the 21st century, to launch a new paradigm for a Eurasian architecture of equal and indivisible security. I won't talk about this in detail. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation already spoke about this very well. We then call upon all Eurasian states to join in this process and to show the same responsibility that our predecessors demonstrated half a century ago. There is no alternative to this dialogue. We need to rid ourselves of prejudices and sit down at the negotiating table. Our appeal, of course, also is addressed to the countries of the European Union, which have traditionally been sceptical of any initiatives coming from the East. But I would like to remind them that this East is far from what it was even a decade ago. It is, in essence, the global South, or even the global majority, you could call it, and that is what must be reckoned with. It's time to finally understand that the days of the dictates of the collective West are a thing of the past. And therefore, I would like to advise European countries to reflect on their place in the world in light of the transformations that are underway, which, as we can all see, are not clearly in their favour. The decline in economic competitiveness is undermining the traditional European model of the welfare state, leading also to a fall in living standards and rising inequality, as we can see. The crazed militarization of the region is driving Europe, especially the new EU and NATO member states, into a deep financial abyss. The foundations of European society are being rapidly destroyed as a result of the virtually uncontrolled mass migration that's taking place and the failed policy of false multiculturalism as a response to this challenge. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of ever more fences that are being hastily erected in the East. These are not just concrete fences, but political, ideological, interpersonal ones, and in essence, civilizational fences. What then do they think lies beyond these fences in the East? It's not just Belarus and Russia anymore. There's also the Indian Ocean, and as our Chinese friends say, a community of shared destiny and shared responsibility for the future of humanity that is stretching all the way to the Pacific horizon that exists there, with the weakening of customs and physical borders, the strengthening of cooperation across the entire spectrum of pressing issues, the development of interpersonal contacts and multifaceted interaction. This is a community where, despite numerous cultural and national differences, people respect each other at the very least and do not impose ideological dogmas and rules of behavior on one another. Billions of people, millions of kilometers of territory, a powerful, rapidly growing economy, and the most advanced technologies, ones that are now our own. We have everything, and our own modern mechanisms for cooperation as well. The BRICS, the SCO, ASEAN, the African Union, the League of Arab States. Therefore, in essence, all of these political and militaristic shenanigans by the EU on its eastern border and economic sanctions against us, these are all measures of harsh self-isolation that are driving EU countries even deeper into domestic economic and political crisis. And allow me to say again, this is self-isolation. If European elites intend to continue in the same vein, it will become even worse for the peoples of Europe. However, all of these problems can be solved if, instead of self-isolation, Europe accepts the concept of Eurasian cooperation and security on our vast continent. And another thing, this year we are marking the quarter century that has passed since, from the rostrum of the General Assembly, one of the greatest hopes and promises in the history of the United Nations were voiced. A full 25 years now separate us from the Millennium Summit, at which the Millennium Development Goals were adopted. At that time, it seemed that with the dawn of a new millennium, we were also entering a new era, one of beneficial globalization and universal prosperity. Where do we find ourselves a quarter of a century later? On the one hand, we have become even more interconnected and interdependent, and this is thanks to technological development, which is constantly changing the concepts of time and space. But on the other hand, multiple fault lines have emerged that completely negate all of the positives. Consider the following figures. In 2000, there were around 50 million displaced persons in the world. Today, there are more than 120 million. More than 1 billion people on the planet still live in multidimensional poverty. Conflicts in Ukraine, Palestine, Syria, post-war syndrome in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and a number of other countries that is preventing the peoples of those countries embarking on the path of recovery. Large-scale military action against sovereign countries outside of any legal framework. Trillions of dollars spent on mindless militarization. This is where we've ended up 25 years on instead of those hopes. Just consider the 6.5 decades of the economic blockade of Cuba, which has also been completely unjustifiably declared a sponsor of terrorism. And in the same vein is the story about some kind of drug threat from Venezuela, which is completely unfounded and unacceptable. Is this really the result that the UN system was striving for 25 years ago? So why did the expectations and hopes of the beginning of the millennium not come true? In this regard, the words of the president of Belarus spoken at that Millennium Summit proved prophetic. For many centuries, a small group of states has determined the fate of the world, viewing other nations as peoples as a disenfranchised mass. The past quarter century has shown that many in the West have been unable to abandon their centuries-old mentality. As a result, the West has not become a leader in the process of change, but rather a source of threats and losses. Certain Western elites that are accustomed to living for centuries at the expense of others continue to exhibit a colonial mindset, albeit a modernized one. It's no surprise that even today they continue to display arrogance and power that they exert over developing countries, which was characteristic of colonial times. Our African friends can speak very eloquently about colonial times, and incidentally they're calling for reparations as well for the harm caused by the West. Over the past quarter of a century, then, we have seen the West not working together to solve development problems, but rather imposing democracy and the weaponization of the economy. This policy has spawned many wars, chaos, millions of refugees, created barriers to international trade, undermined global food security, entrenched poverty, hunger, and inequality, and international organizations, chief among them the UN and the WTO, have been sidelined. That is why, in response to these negative trends, the idea of regionalization is becoming popular, and cooperation mechanisms that aren't linked to Western countries, such as, well, as I already mentioned, the BRICS, SCO, ASEAN, CIS, the League of Arab States, and the African Union, they're growing and strengthening. They reflect the interests of the global majority countries. They work on the basis of mutual respect, equality, and consensus, rather than domination and plunder. They essentially are forming a fair multipolar economic architecture for development. And it's only natural then that the Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward a very timely initiative on global governance, which Belarus fully supports. Mr. President, the words of the great Italian thinker of the past century, Antonio Gramsci, who wrote "From a fascist prison," are more relevant today than ever. The old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born. It is indeed paradoxical that even today the new world is being born in agony because the old world does not want to quietly leave the stage. We're not the ones destroying the old world. The West itself is doing a perfectly fine job of that, but we, the global majority, are trying to build a new one, and I would like to underscore that particularly. It's together. It is the key word from the theme of this General Assembly. We're doing this together with our like-minded partners. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belarus. أعطي الكلمة الآن.
I give the floor to His Excellency Mohammed Salim Wild Marzouk, Minister for Foreign Affairs, African Cooperation and Mauritanians Abroad of Mauritania. In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate. Your Excellency, Mr. President, Your Majesties, Excellencies and Highnesses, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may God, peace, mercy and blessings be upon you. I would like at the outset to extend my warmest congratulations to Her Excellency Ms. Annalena Baerbock on her assumption of the presidency of the 80th session of the General Assembly. I am confident that her rich experience and her high competence will contribute to her successful leadership of this session. I would like to also extend my sincere thanks to His Excellency Philemon Young for the highly competent leadership of the 79th session. I also extend my thanks to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, for his tireless efforts to develop and enhance the role of the UN. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to convey to you the greetings of His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Wild Sheikh Al Ghazwani, President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, and his wishes for the success of the 80th session of the GA. His Excellency honored me by allowing me to deliver on his behalf the address of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. This session, of course and naturally, represents an opportunity to celebrate 80 years of achievements by our organization in the service of humanity as a whole and in various fields. But it is also an opportunity to objectively diagnose the major shortcomings and deficiencies that have characterize this or that aspect of the UN's journey over the past 8 decades. In this context, it is clear that our world today consists of two contrasting realms, two contrasting worlds. One is rapidly advancing toward the fourth industrial revolution and artificial intelligence, while the other remains hostage to poverty and marginalization. This gap, this ever-widening gap, particularly in view of the current context of growing conflicts and wars, this gap presents a difficult test to humanity. It requires us to unite our efforts to devise solutions that are capable of narrowing this gap by achieving just and comprehensive human-centered development and the right of every human to a dignified life. The theme of our session today reflects and accurately captures this noble goal. Better together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the session is convened amidst a global context that is extremely complex and challenging. We see tensions, wars, conflicts that are escalating in various regions. We see also the exacerbating effects of terrorist threats and natural disasters resulting from climate change. Human suffering is increasing, and the humanitarian burdens on entire populations are multiplying. This exposes international peace and stability to increasing risks and reinforces the need for a more effective role of the UN. Amidst all of this, the genocidal war being waged against our people in Gaza is a true litmus test to the human conscience and the credibility of the international system. We in the Islamic Republic of Mauritania condemn this aggression and this genocidal war and reiterate our support for the Palestinian people. And we stress that violence cannot bring lasting peace and security, and that stability in the Middle East as a whole depends inevitably on enabling the brotherly Palestinian people to realize their right to establish an independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital, in line with relevant international resolutions and the Arab Peace Initiative. In this context, we are pleased to have seen the momentum in the efforts to recognize the state of Palestine. That was powerfully demonstrated by the overwhelming vote in the UN General Assembly in favor of the New York Declaration on the implementation of the two-state solution, which was the outcome of the high-level international conference that was held in July 2025 at the initiative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Republic of France. I have here to thank, on behalf of my country, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Republic of France for organizing the aforementioned conference despite all the challenges and the obstacles. I commend the positions of those countries that have recognized the state of Palestine, and I hope that other countries will follow suit in upholding the principles of truth and justice until Palestine becomes a full member of the United Nations. In the same vein, my country reiterates its strong condemnation of the recent Israeli aggression against the brotherly state of Qatar, which constitutes a flagrant violation of this country's sovereignty and of all international norms and conventions. We also affirm our support for peaceful solutions in Libya, Sudan, Yemen, and Syria. We support all international efforts regarding Western Sahara, and we call for a negotiated end to the Russia-Ukraine war to spare the world further tragedies. At the same time, we commend the peace agreements between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo on the one hand and between Pakistan and India on the other. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in a world where conflicts, poverty, disease, climate change are burdening humanity, the need is more urgent for more just and effective international and global political, economic, and health governance that places and prioritizes human life and dignity. This can only be achieved through a balanced reform that restores confidence in the United Nations and renders the organization more capable of fulfilling its noble purposes and goals of safeguarding peace and security and building a more equitable world. Accordingly, my country renews its commitment to the legitimate demands of our African continent as set out in the Eswatini Consensus for Equitable Representation in Global Governance Structures. We call the international